Thank you so much. It's great to be here with you all talking about a topic that is critical to our economy, to people's lives. So it's wonderful to have you all here. I want to introduce Catherine Crago is first here. She's head of strategic initiatives and resource development at the Housing Authority of the City of Austin. So thank you, Catherine. And we have Parissa Fatehi Weeks, head of community impact strategy of Google Fiber. This is a national leadership role, and you're based here in Austin, I guess, right? So that's perfect. So we have a wonderful panel. Dina couldn't come, but I will cover some of what she was going to talk about, as well as Catherine, because Catherine and the Housing Authority of Austin was the model that Connect Home used. Dina's with Connect Home at HUD, and the Austin Housing Authority was the model that they used, and they mentored the Connect Home sites. So Catherine will help us, give us a perspective as well. So our little clicker didn't work, but we are going to make do. Why would the Federal Reserve be interested in digital inclusion? And that's something that came to our attention because of actually the study that I did on the Texas border, the colonias, the very lowest income people in the country. I was talking to them about basic infrastructure, about water and wastewater and paved roads, and they were talking to me about that, but also that they didn't have access to the internet, that their kids couldn't do their homework at home, that they couldn't participate in job training opportunities with a local community college that required online access. And that led us to trying to understand what is the digital divide. Lo and behold, one of the greatest digital divides for a whole region is on the Texas-Mexico border region. So that's what brought it to our attention. The community gathered, and we also have a demonstration on the border, which we can talk about later, to close the digital divide. It's a group of people like you all. I looked at the list of people who had signed up today, and we have people from banking. We have people from government, from municipal government, county government, heads of nonprofits, and other anchor institutions. So those are all the people that have to come together to close the digital divide in our communities. And hopefully at the end of this session, you'll get kind of a sense of how that can be done. We're gonna look at a specific example of Connect Home. We're gonna learn from a practitioner in the field, as well as an ISP, internet service provider, Google Fiber, with their perspective as well. But let's look at the world we're living in right now. Technological advancements are changing everything, and it's necessary for us to prepare citizens to even participate in the economy, to be able to deal with all the changes in the workforce and so forth. We have automation changing manufacturing, robots or machines replacing people's jobs, and people having to work and have more digital skills to work side by side with machines, and e-commerce transforming retail and brick and mortar, and all the adjustments that companies are having to make, and that of course impacts jobs, and we have artificial intelligence augmenting labor and even replacing labor. So they say that in just a few years, the jobs are changing so fast that we haven't even thought of what the new jobs are going to be in the future. We have, it's really impacting banking, for example, and the healthcare industry, remote models for the provision of services that are very promising, but who is being left out, right? So online and mobile banking, the FDIC has done a study and said, it's very promising. In other words, we might be better at reaching low and moderate income people through mobile and online banking. But there's a problem, the digital divide, which we're talking about today. Growth in the contingent workforce, the whole, all the futurists that were at our workforce development conference that we had a couple of months ago here in Austin, we're talking about there's going to be greater and greater wealth inequality. And part of it is about all these changes, but the contingent workforce, the gig economy, there's no longer a safety net for people, a relationship with their employer. Uber drivers they're independent contractors. In many occupations like that, the gig economy, the contingent workforce, that is creating challenges for people to make ends meet or to have that kind of stability that they need. 3D printing, changing manufacturing, self-driving vehicles, algorithms, don't even get me started talking about that one. I have a new piece coming out that is going to go into that. It's about how financial services are changing. But basically, algorithms are deciding very important things for people. And they're based on cognitive computing, right? Mass, big data. So they're learning, the computer can generate a result based on historical information. But if that historical information is biased or prejudiced against women, people of color, but if that's the history, which we know it is in many cases, it's determining whether you get a job, whether you get a mortgage, whether you get insurance, all the basic things that help people to make ends meet, to prosper, to build their family. All those very big things are being controlled by algorithms. So it's important that we help people understand what's happening so that we can not be bandied about by these forces, but instead rise up and say, we're going to make laws that help protect people. We're going to include reasoning. When we're looking at data, we're going to say, what doesn't make sense about this? And always be questioning, because otherwise we're going to have these greater and greater wealth inequalities, because we're going to be perpetuating the past in some cases. So broadband is the platform for all areas of community development. So in banking, I'm going to use that as the frame today, we look at community development under the Community Reinvestment Act. That was a law that was established in the 70s to prevent or to respond to redlining and to make credit available to people and financial services available to people who had been left out. In fact, in San Antonio, I had an old 30s map of redlining in San Antonio, and I overlaid our digital inclusion map. Who had access to the internet? It's the exact same thing. If you create persistent poverty by not allowing people to own property, to get a mortgage, for example, you are going to create a persistent poverty, because you don't have intergenerational transfer of wealth when you limit people's ability to build assets, or a community's ability to attract business and so forth. So it wasn't surprising that when I did the mapping of San Antonio, that digital inclusion, again, we saw was directly correlated with income and indeed with the old redlining maps. What we look at is essential infrastructure, workforce development and education, access to financial services, small business development, affordable housing, and healthcare generally in the CRA. So all those are areas for investment for financial institutions to invest in their community. So CRA was meant to prevent redlining, to make financial services available to people, and also to have them invest in their community, be responsive to community needs, to be involved in all the really powerful ways that you can when you have financing mechanisms for community development, for building affordable housing and so forth. So indeed, digital inclusion is a new area of community development and the CRA, because it is the platform for all of these things, which we're going to talk about. So broadband was included in the new Q&A guidance as essential infrastructure that banks could invest in. And we're collecting a lot of examples from around the country for banks stepping up and financing an expansion of broadband infrastructure. And under the service test, it was a major update to the service test, because before, banks were judged on whether they had branches in low and moderate income communities. And that was important, right? All the activists said we have to have branches because otherwise people won't have access. Well, now, even though we have the digital divide, we're saying if you could innovate there, if financial institutions can innovate there in reaching low and moderate income people with mobile and online banking and financial technology, and if they can do better and show results, that it can count toward the service test. So we have a lot of innovations in technology, but if we're not reaching low and moderate income people, if we're not innovating there, then we're not going to get the results that we want. So that was an important update. Workforce development is digital inclusion, training in digital skills. We'll talk a little bit more specifically about how jobs are changing. Just having the access matters to being able to apply for jobs and so forth. And in small business development, we know the importance of small business to have access to technology and to their customer base. The publication that we're going to be referring to is Closing the Digital Divide. We have some on the buffet there that you can take before you leave. So with that, I'm just going to talk about a couple of other things. So this is the publication. It's basically the how-to guide for communities and financial institutions to work together, to come together to close the digital divide in their communities. And just to let you know, under CRA, the purpose is for banks to reach low and moderate income communities. So it's about creating opportunities there in all those areas that I talked about. And every way you slice it, and I slice it several ways in this publication, and hopefully you'll find it useful for grant writing or other, but I show how income is directly correlated, or internet access is directly correlated with income. And in a plot chart, you can see the major cities of 100,000 or more, and basically it's directly correlated with area median income and the amount of access you have. So you have Detroit, Miami, certainly San Antonio is in the bottom third of internet access. Those are also with a lower area median income. Austin happens to be in the top third of access to the internet. So Austin has done really well in that regard. But we know as we look into cities that certain people are still left out based on income. This is just San Antonio. I won't go too much into it, but I just wanted to tell you that also on the big map, you can see the big picture that the South, and actually these are all the red areas are the areas with the least internet connectivity. Those are also the persistent poverty areas of the country, the Central Appalachia, the Texas border, areas of Indian country, the Mississippi Delta. So it's very directly correlated to, and it tells you an important story of rural America, of a lot, but you have to zoom in and look at your own community. This is just at 3 Mbps. According to the FCC, broadband is at least 25 Mbps down and 3 up. This is just 3 Mbps down, so it's a very low threshold, but you can still see in San Antonio we have the lower income areas are on the east side, the west side, and the south side, and where it says San Antonio is downtown. So you can see that the pinker or the redder sections are the least connected, even at those low speeds. And the Alamo Heights and Dominion and all these areas to the north, what some people call the crescent of comfort in San Antonio, you have the highest internet connectivity. So these maps are important. Speed is important too. Yes?
Can I ask you a question about your map? Is the map looking at availability or
This one is access. This is subscriptions. So, and that's also important when you're looking at maps. Availability is one thing. It's good to know, right? But what is the speed? What is the capacity? How many people can they afford it? You know, all of those things are very important to look at. This one is adoption. And this one as well is the big map of the U.S., according to the census of adoption.
And when you look at the least populated parts of the country, they still have, it looks like they still have subscriptions. So it's not as much a question about availability. Because like the western half of the United States is less densely populated than the eastern seaboard or the southeast United States, but yet your map seems to indicate that there is broadband service.
Yeah, and it's just complicated with the maps. You have to really know what these different data sets, like from the FCC, sometimes you're just looking at availability, that there are ISPs there. But that doesn't, like in the border, there are many ISPs there, but there aren't people that can afford service, or it's at such low speeds because there's not enough. So wireless depends on fiber optic networks, very strategically placed so that they can be strong, a quick enough connection, right, to the wireless device. Even if you're not doing fiber to the home for the last mile, you have to have fiber optic infrastructure to have the speed and capacity that you need. So there are a lot of issues with the map. I like to use them just as a big picture, not as a diagnostic tool, but you're right, you're raising some of the issues. And sometimes it's too big picture. You have to really survey your community, like Sharon Strover did in Austin as they were starting their work. Incredible information about neighborhoods, and you could really be more targeted and intervene more effectively. And then just to say that even to participate in the internet economy, you have to have broadband access and digital skills. And this was just my way of trying to show how even to participate as a consumer, you need to have basic literacy and connectivity. To have a bank account and access to financial services, you need to have connectivity. And then the higher level you go up, the higher you can participate and get a higher paid job in our economy. Computer and technical skills training, then you can be a skilled worker, and we're going to talk about how jobs are changing. And if you get into computer programming and coding, you can definitely work for a tech company or in many sectors that require that knowledge, healthcare and others, right? Or you can be an entrepreneur. So basically, and this was something that Dina was going to cover, so I'm taking her time now. But this is in this publication. Basically, most jobs are just posted online. So when we look at workforce development, a critical part of community development in CRA, 70% of jobs are posted only online. Job training programs, increasingly, like what I found on the border, are offered online, or a majority of their sections are online. 8 in 10 middle skills jobs require digital skills. So middle skills jobs are those jobs that don't require a college degree, but offer a living wage. We're losing a lot of those. You saw in that first chart of manufacturing, the way it's changing. We're losing access to the middle class because those manufacturing jobs, whether you're in the steel industry, you could go out of high school and make a good living and have a career. We're losing those kinds of jobs. So 8 in 10 middle skills jobs require digital skills. That's 32% of labor market demand. So we really have to build that up to build pathways into the middle class. When we talk about the great wealth and income inequality, with the greatest since the Great Depression that we're experiencing in the United States, San Antonio sadly got ranked the greatest in income and wealth inequality and the worst in income and wealth inequality in the country. So you're talking about hollowing out of the middle class, and this is on the ground. This is what's happening. We're losing those jobs. The new jobs require digital skills. Are we preparing people for the workforce and for those types of jobs? As manufacturing has changed, many sectors are changing and requiring digital skills. That's why digital inclusion and the topic of today is so important. And we have those are jobs that offer higher wages in general. The homework gap, which I mentioned, was when the kids can't do their homework at home because they don't have connection. It's really creating inequity for children of low-income families, because those are the ones most impacted. 1/3 of households in the United States in general with incomes below area median income of $50,000 with school-age children don't have high-speed internet access at home. That's 40% of all families with school-age children. So what I was hearing on the border in this qualitative research that I was doing, it's a big thing across the country, right? And something we have to be concerned about, and why we understood that this is essential infrastructure and not a luxury. I won't go into all of this. We can talk about it later, but basically everything is changing in banking, losing brick and mortar branches. After the Great Recession, mobile and online is becoming more and more important, and having access in that way. The total number of density of banking branches declined during the Great Recession, the post-Great Recession. Paper checks have fallen, people visiting branches, and the FDIC study that I mentioned is very important here, because it says that, I'm sorry, I went ahead. It says that it's promising. If banks can get really good at reaching low and moderate income people through mobile and online banking and other financial technology, then it's an innovation that's certainly called for now because of all these massive changes. This publication talks about basically digital inclusion requires 3 legs of the stool. Do you have broadband access? Do you have sufficient infrastructure? And I give on the appendix the infrastructure ways of expanding your broadband infrastructure as a community. Local governments are very important here, that meaning school districts, municipal governments, and county governments. And we have the demonstration on the border and they're some of the key players, because that's where the power is to have the infrastructure you need in your community. Computer access and affordability, it's that piece of the service itself and the computer. Do people have computers? We're going to look at some programs today that build all of that into their programming. And then training and technical assistance. Whether people adopt or not, is it relevant to their lives? Are you teaching them skills and they're seeing how relevant it is to their lives? The trust factor, the basic understanding of it so they can feel comfortable with it, and so forth. You can kind of read more details about the 3 legs of the stool of internet adoption. This is just another way to look at it. Basically, it's to say that you can't go anywhere without the infrastructure. You either have to deploy new infrastructure or expand your infrastructure to reach low-income communities. We're discovering very innovative ways to do that in San Antonio. We're going to be a Google Fiber city, but in the process, we also have some infrastructure that we can be very creative about expanding into low-income communities that hasn't been tried yet. We're kind of exploring all of those things. And then just to say on Dina's behalf, she was going to come talk about Connect Home, which is a digital inclusion program of HUD, and it exists in 28 pilot communities and 30 new communities now as of last year, I believe. 100 new communities by 2020. It's basically public housing authorities and how to provide internet connectivity for all their residents, or the greatest number of residents that they can. And they learn this kind of a model from the Austin Housing Authority, and it also includes digital inclusion training. And we're seeing some really incredible stories come up with their digital ambassadors and the people that are going through the training, how it's helping them access higher paying jobs with those skills. So we're seeing some really direct results in San Antonio and Austin and across the country of the huge impact that that can have. In my paper, I quote the head of IBM who calls these kinds of jobs that require maybe digital skills but not a college degree necessarily as new collar jobs. So those are some pathways that we need to think about. We want people to have a 4-year degree, yes, but we need to create all kinds of pathways that we're losing to the middle class if we're going to keep it whole. So with that, I'll turn it over to Catherine to talk a little bit about the Housing Authority of the City of Austin.
Okay, great. Good afternoon. How's everybody doing? Are you getting that post-lunchtime kind of lull? It's okay to take a stretch break if you won't want to. So thank you for coming. So just, Jordana pointed out that we have a very diverse audience here. And so could you just have a show of hands? Who here is from a nonprofit? Okay, how about bank, financial institution? Okay, what about education? Okay, all right, I see our ACC interns, our HACA interns there, awesome. And what about government? Wow, okay, perfect, yeah, so this is the perfect audience. Many of you then have probably heard of the Housing Authority of the City of Austin. It is our 80th anniversary. We're the oldest housing authority in the United States. We serve about, yep, what? And yes, so we have some great old photos of LBJ, in a brand new suit over at Santa Rita Courts and welcoming folks to come to the first public housing authority in the U.S. And so we serve today that dream, that legacy of his is still very much alive. We serve the lowest income folks, the neediest in Austin. Average income is about $11,000 per household. We serve about 5,000 in public housing, 14,000 people in Section 8 housing, which is called affordable housing. And really this conference about reimagining the American dream, homeownership is the American dream. And as I'm fairly new to public housing and have traveled around to various conferences and so forth, I ask people from other PHAs, what is the goal of public housing? And the majority of those people will say safe, decent, affordable, bricks, mortar, windows, toilets flush, that's our job. One of the things that's unique about the Housing Authority of the City of Austin is the belief that it's really the people who are in the homes, that it's important, once your house is in order, to focus on those folks and ensuring that they can have every opportunity they need to move into affordable housing, to achieve their dreams of education, and ultimately move into market rate housing if that's on their trajectory. So this moment right here, this is really kind of what it's about for us. This is Katora Haywood. She's one of our HACA scholarship recipients. She's giving a talk here. Her mother had been ill for the last year of her high school, but she still graduated at the top of her class and received a scholarship to go to the University of Texas. So this is a person who grew up at one of our properties, Booker T. Washington, who is going to break the cycle of poverty and is ultimately going to be contributing to Austin's rich economic life, social life, and in many ways. Now, Jordana, you shared that a third of folks in the U.S. of children don't have internet access at home. They can't do their homework at home. And we know there are many parents, like Katora's mother, who know the cost of getting their children internet access. And it's not because they pay for it. It's because they know how long it takes to drive a car and idle outside of a Walmart or McDonald's so their child can do their homework on a smartphone using somebody else's broadband, or they know the cost of that bus pass or what they have to trade to have a neighbor drive their child to a library or the next school that's open so their child can do homework on the weekends. They know how many hours of work they have to take off in order to ensure that their child can get internet access. So So they're keenly aware of the relationship between internet access, their monthly budget, and their child being able to perform and compete at the top of their class. It is in 2014, actually, that we learned through a Choice Neighborhoods grant that about 15% of our residents had internet access at home. 15%. And so Google Fiber had just come to Austin, and it was big news. I came from the tech industry, and it was just, all of my former colleagues and every industry newspaper was talking about this wonderful, Austin was selected. And as a part of that, we applied for a community connection grant to have 10 years of free 1,000 megabytes per second internet connection at our Booker T. Washington Community Center. My understanding is there were thousands of applications for those community connections, and Booker T. Washington was awarded one of those. And so it was at that point that our executive vice president started to ask, well, why can't every person in public housing, why can't every family have this at home? And discussions began between the Housing Authority, Google Fiber, and the City of Austin. And ultimately, we were very fortunate to launch a program called Unlocking the Connection, which promises to provide every Housing Authority resident with a free internet connection, digital literacy training, and an earned refurbished device, computer device. So those are those three legs of the stool that Jordana was talking about. And so it's interesting from a Housing Authority perspective, and depending on what organization you work in, the internet connection is really an infrastructure kind of construction problem. The digital literacy, well, that's a services problem. And the earned device, that's a product problem. And so these are three kinds of different things that need to converge at the same time to enable a family to be self-sufficient. So in November of 2014, we launched our Unlocking the Connection initiative, thanks to Google Fiber and partnerships with other folks such as Austin Freenet and Austin Community College. And so we launched, and this is the HUD Secretary, Julian Castro, at our Booker T. Washington facility. He was new in public housing then, and what we learned, as Jordana said, is that he went back to HUD 3 months in the job and gathered folks together and said, how can I do this in every housing authority in the U.S.? So our project began. And so what we did is our properties span, 18 public housing properties span from north to south. And we don't have a crescent of comfort like San Antonio does. We call this the crescent of poverty in Austin, this eastern crescent. And those red outlined properties, we call that phase 1. And those were the properties that Google Fiber said we're going to connect first. And so during phase 1, our program was really focused on basic access. Texas was the second state in the nation to mandate digital literacy, K through 12, the second state in the nation to require schools to develop digital textbooks. And so we believed that these basics are going to help children do homework at home. We're now in just past phase 2, which deals with the Central East, and we've connected now our Booker T. Washington terraces, which I'm going to talk to you more about. 216 households, our largest property, and Selena apartments as well. Some of these others are going through some construction, so we've delayed the connection of those. And we're really focused in phase 2 on, applications. How can folks use their digital literacy and their internet connection and their device to be more self-sufficient, to be more economically independent, to benefit their families? Energy is a significant cost in our residents, in our families. And so this is a smart home pilot that we've started at our Shadow Bend property. It's 50 households. And basically we've installed Nest thermostats so that residents can use their Google Fiber to monitor energy consumption. And this is in Armando Valadez's home. And he volunteered to be an energy ambassador, which is basically a HACA stipend-paid resident that agrees to learn everything that they need to learn about this connectivity and to share that with their neighbors. Because as we started to install these thermostats, when it got cold, my phone was ringing. The thermostat is broken. It turned out there was something wrong with a particular brand of heaters that we had just installed. It wasn't the thermostat. But people, despite the best claims of folks that it's so intuitive, everyone will get it, right? It's just like a mechanical thermostat. You just turn the dial. Well, in most of these Internet of Things that Jordana talked about, there is a kind of a mindset that's related to digital literacy. What does an arrow mean? Do you want me to go down? Do you want me to turn to the side? Do you mean keep going or stop? What does the concept of scrolling mean? How do you interact with something that scrolls? If something is highlighted, does that mean I've done it, or does that mean you can now do that? So these are the kinds of issues that even Guerrero, one of our best technicians, because he didn't have a smartphone, was really unfamiliar with those kinds of interfaces. So our energy ambassadors are hired, and they help their neighbors make sense of some of these new things. Energy savings from the Nest, 2% a year. Not that big of a deal, right? But every Austinite is able to enroll in demand response with the city of Austin, so that the city as a whole can control the amount of money that is spent on energy. Now, and those Austinites who do that receive a $75 rebate. Now our residents can also participate in helping the city save money, and they're also eligible for that $75 rebate. So this is just kind of a very simple micro case. An unintended outcome of this, folks that are bedridden, we learned that caregivers were coming out every time it was too hot or too cold. Now those caregivers don't have to make those trips. And all of those trips. It's not a substitute, but all of those trips. And so that's an unintended interesting outcome. So we have energy. Another common expense, transportation. And we were so fortunate because the Transit Empowerment Fund believed in a budding program that we had and provided funding for us to establish a mobility ambassador program that would help public housing residents learn to use digital tools to navigate transportation. And here you can see one of our residents who was a digital ambassador became a mobility ambassador, Pam Newsom, and Kendra Garrett, who's an LBJ student who's actually here today. And they're mapping out her trips. Turns out there was physical therapy required for something, and 3 times a week she had to take the bus for about 2 hours each way. Now, there was a solution, which was for her to use a car to go to avoid about 1 hour and 15 minutes of that trip. She didn't have a smartphone. She's not in the app economy. And so unlocking that, hour and 15 minutes each way time saver required digital literacy and a smartphone and, low-cost internet. And so they're doing some planning here, and then thanks to Cap Metro and some of our other partners, we were able to do transit adventures. So this is a team of mobility ambassadors with our digital inclusion fellow, Sam Story, who is an LBJ school student, and they're learning how to use their smartphones to purchase tickets on the Cap Metro bus, to see where their bus is, and then they're also tracking their data. So we're putting those data points, places that residents go that are difficult, and places they would like to go but can't go to because it's too difficult. We're plotting those in an ArcMap. And one of our residents is learning to do this, so we can provide this data back to the city. And so these are 2 of our digital ambassadors who have been providing information to a council member here, sharing out their data. So these are 2 kinds of costs in a family's budget that need to be controlled. Mr. Dennis says, will they make it at the end of the month? And so I want to just jump back quickly to Booker T. Washington. This is the property, Booker T. Washington. You can see it kind of outlined here, 216 households. And you remember the launch of our Unlocking the Connection program. Well, on September 25th last year, we went live with Google Fiber. And we asked folks, we asked them as we launched, and some of our intern team members are here and our program coordinator, we're out there with surveys, we asked them, are you paying for internet now? And you know, this is the launch. You can see there's lots of kids, and you know, what's the economic impact of them now having free Google Fiber in their homes? Well, it turned out that about 50% of the 70 people that we talked to had never owned a desktop computer. It turned out that 45% of the people that we talked to were already paying for internet. They were paying between $50 a month and $225 per month. Now those families earn between $2,500 a year, and the highest earner is $24,500 per year. So what we learned is that these families are spending between 3% on average for the high wage earners, and up to 109% of their annual income on internet. The majority in the median are spending between 17 and 30% of their annual income on internet service before Google Fiber came. So these families that were paying for internet, now they'll save on average about $1,200 per year because they have free internet in their homes. The families that couldn't afford internet, so the remaining families, we asked, well, why don't you have internet? And about 15% said it's not relevant to me. The remainder said, because I can't afford it. The majority said I can't afford it. Some said because it's not safe. So now those families will have the opportunity to gain all of the benefits of internet, the economic benefits for their families. I want to just jump back here to this map, which shows, this is from the Kirwan Institute, and the Kirwan Institute studies economics, the areas of opportunity. And we as a housing authority, we want our residents to, when they do move out of public housing into affordable housing, we want them to move into areas of higher opportunity. The shading here shows the rate of change. So the green areas are areas that are becoming areas of opportunity very quickly. And the other areas are areas where there's less change. Well, many of our housing authorities are in areas where there's very little change in terms of economic opportunity. And we see internet access and digital literacy as a way for them to engage in education, to engage in workforce development, and to access better healthcare opportunities. Our goal ultimately is to ensure that all of our residents can access the riches of the internet, and it really takes a village to do that. And these are some of our partners, the partners that we work with. So I think that I'll wrap up for now, and it's a good moment for Parissa to share a little bit about Google Fiber from the national perspective.
Can't I just talk about our work in Austin?
Hey, yeah, great work.
Should I take it from here?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you, both of you. Those were both incredible presentations. My name's Parissa Fatehi-Weeks. Like Jordana said, I'm at Google Fiber. My background pre-Google Fiber is as a nonprofit attorney working on issues of economic opportunity, in particular on access to affordable housing and public transit with low-income communities and communities of color, especially in the Bay Area. I grew up here in Austin since I was 5 months old. Actually lived in sort of university-subsidized housing along Lake Austin Boulevard. So I personally get the need to be in a high-opportunity area, especially when you're your family is still learning the ropes. In the new country, you don't have as many resources. You really rely on the bus. You rely on your neighbors. You need each other. So I have a very personal tie to it. But then went on to do some of that work in the Bay Area in a place where the tech industry, which is happening across the country now, was really changing communities, changing where working communities, lower income communities, and communities of color could live. So I was a fairly skeptical entrant to the tech industry, but was intrigued by the opportunity to go on into the inside, into the belly of the beast, and see what was this company trying to do on digital inclusion. What did it mean to be an internal advocate, and really see how you could sort of, as a business, think about the triple bottom line, where you're making decisions that are good for the financial sustainability of the company, but are also good for the community and lift people up. And it's a learning, it's a work in progress. We're still learning. It is not the easiest thing to hit the triple bottom line on day one. So I've learned a ton. And I want to just say I started my work with Google Fiber as the community impact manager for Austin. And so one of my very first projects within the first month was actually engaging in this conversation with the Housing Authority of the City of Austin, and just telling my other team members. Austin was only the second city that Google Fiber was sort of launching its work in, second or third, depending on how you look at Provo. But I remember saying, okay, we have something here that could be a template for how we do work in other cities. Whether or not we have the same kind of partner in every housing authority that we have in HACA, the lesson here is find your community leaders that know how to think about the big picture, improve the economic opportunity prospects, how that relates to digital inclusion, meet people where they're at, and then really amplify their work. They are the experts. The folks at HACA know more about the day-to-day of the public housing residents that they serve than we as a tech company ever can. But we do want to learn. We hope you'll let us partner with you and put our sort of troops on the ground. And we've had what we call our brand ambassadors do everything from daily office hours at the housing authority's properties to just build trust with the residents. Because it turned out, and Catherine alluded to this, when we first started at our very first property, telling residents we're offering free Google Fiber, people were like, yeah, but what do you really mean? Nothing's really free. I get that you're saying it's free, but I'm not sure I'm going to sign up for that, because you're probably going to, the promo price is going to end in 30 days, and then suddenly I'm going to be charged, which is a very appropriate, skeptical view to hold. And I think they should keep having that attitude, but we would literally invest just hours of being there and doing and investing in nonprofits like Austin Freenet to help them resource digital literacy training workshops, but also just sit in the back and be there to meet the residents and develop relationships, so that maybe by the next month's rent week, when we were going to come back out and be around because we knew there would be higher foot traffic, maybe then they would approach our table and sign up. And that was the sort of slow trickle of building trust, that then by the third property, there was more of an understanding. There was word of mouth between properties that we didn't get charged on the third month, we're still getting it. And we loved our digital literacy training workshops, that Computer 101 class. I walked out of it getting to set up my own Facebook page for this business I've been trying to start for the longest time. And so the stories just went from there, and we were just sort of in humble awe of what HACA and the residents and how they took it, the heights to which they took it. And that's been really, truly the experience in many of the cities that Google Fiber has gone in with different projects. I think this one was a slam dunk example of what can go well when you collaborate with a housing authority. HACA is a superstar in that sense. In other cities, so we came out of our Kansas City experience really seeing that, not unlike what we learned with our HACA partners, but that even if you have a low price product, if you're offering the internet, if people don't see it as essential, and this is 4 years ago now, and this changes every year. But at first, a lot of people felt like they were fine without the internet. Why would they sign up? And so we found we need to launch some innovative awareness building programs. We invested and created something called the Digital Inclusion Fellowship Program, where we basically wanted to build the capacity, put more community leaders that were full-time thinking about digital inclusion and building the digital literacy of their communities. So in each of our fiber cities when we started out, I think we added about 2 fellows so that nonprofits in town could apply to get a new staff member that was exclusively dedicated to digital inclusion. We're in our 5th cohort of those now, and the model has evolved. We're building the capacity of existing staff members to know how to do these digital literacy trainings. But that's been a huge learning. In Atlanta, nonprofit leaders at an organization called Power My Learning really showed if you can invest in intergenerational learning, it makes a huge difference. The kids teach their parents. The cycle just changes completely. In Durham, some newer place-based initiatives where we're partnering with the Boys and Girls Club and the Y and the school district to think about how do we bring that 3-legged stool that both of you talked about to life in neighborhoods, whether or not our infrastructure has reached there yet, because turns out building an internet network takes a long time and is complicated. In Charlotte, there's some organizations where we found, again, that intergenerational daddy-daughter code-ins and some innovations in STEM education. But I will pause there, but I think what I want to tell you is that we have seen a return in investment in spades in just the community leadership in each of the cities where we've gone, and how if we listen and we collaborate in a respectful way, the system works so much better than if we come in with some model and some idea of exactly how something needs to be done and let's cram it down and let's make it work. It's been so much more fruitful to be organic and authentic partners.
Thank you, Parissa. So I guess I'll begin with Parissa and ask you, from an ISP, an internet service provider's perspective, and as we're working, the Federal Reserve, working across communities, we're always trying to include ISPs as part of the discussion. But I want to learn from you, what was it like, you kind of have touched on it, to work with the Austin Housing Authority, with housing authorities in general? What is it like, and what have you learned from that experience?
I've learned that what Catherine said is true, which is not every housing authority has the same holistic view of the opportunity they have to build the self-sufficiency and economic opportunities of their residents that HACA does. HACA is at the leading edge of taking action on that vision. Many are, though, picking up on that. We also work at different paces, right? So Google Fiber, even big Google and the larger company is a large bureaucracy in many ways. Google Fiber has some of that, but we're also a tiny startup relative to the larger ecosystem that makes up Alphabet and Google. And there were many times, I think, when we needed to make very rapid changes or pivot to a different direction. And I think it was lucky that both I came from the nonprofit and previously from the government, and then Catherine came from tech, that we were able to sort of translate at times. But it was not without hiccups, and we didn't solve all the problems. I'll say we still require an electronic form of payment if you need to sign up for Google Fiber. Not every public housing resident, or frankly low-income resident in general, is banked with an electronic form of payment. So we had to create a lot of workarounds using electronic gift payment cards, or things that still aren't perfect and that we still continue to need to work on. But I learned that those could break relationships, those hiccups, and it really takes commitment to the vision of what you're trying to achieve at the end to kind of make it through some of those hiccups, both from our end, because I think some companies may have said, this is a lot of work, and it's expensive, and we tried it, we got we got some good from it, but we're going to go try something different. And Haka similarly could have walked away, and I think we've stuck it out through a lot of change and hiccups, and I'm glad.
That's awesome. And Catherine, I was going to ask you, you mentioned sometimes people don't know the relevance to their lives or why it's important to be connected. How do you deal with that? How do you work with families and intergenerationally with the children and the parents?
Yeah, that's a good point. So as Parissa said, we believed that we were fortunate that when we started, we had some really great resources. We had funding from Open Societies Foundation, from the Ford Foundation. We were working with this great partner, and we could have, the temptation was there to just buy a truckload of tablets and spread them among the residents and spend all your money right away. And then let's see what happens. Hopefully something will grow. But we agreed we're going to start slow, and we're going to start small, and we're going to fail small so that we can learn and ultimately go faster. And so we agreed to start with this, here's the Google Fiber, part of Google, and all this big, we're going to start with a 33 household property called Manchac Village. And we're going to spend 2 months there. Sometimes the number of staff people, as Parissa said, outnumbering the number of residents that were there. It's like, is this a good return on investment? And and because it's true. So relevancy, sometimes internet connection doesn't seem relevant because I hear the words you're using, but I don't trust that you understand my situation. And so those hours that Google Fiber reps spent and Austin Freenet folks spent, hanging out with people at Manchac Village really helped build a shared context, a shared understanding of what is the situation here, what is it that you do want to do, how are you checking your credit score now? Well, how are you paying your light bill? Well, my sister picks me up on Tuesdays. Well, if I get the internet, then my sister will stop coming on Tuesdays. So you're going to disintermediate the relationships that I have, which is what makes the internet cost effective. But it's looking at, well, where are the correct or right applications for the internet in your life, and then sometimes it's really about others. One of the first phone call that I got at Haka, which was right before Christmas, was Marilyn Thompson from George and Manor, and her property's north of 183 on Lamar. And so she calls in, I just got the newsletter. It was November 23rd. And it was my first call, my first call in public service. So I was like, don't mess this up. This is a resident. This is our customer. And she said, I've just got to make it to the training because my son, Frank, is an AB honor roll student. And he spends about 9 hours on the weekend traveling from computer lab to school. She took the bus an hour and a half each way every day for 6 weeks to earn a computer for her son. Earned the computer. Frank graduated at the top of his class. He's at Texas State. He has scholarship. Well, Marilyn learned that she could make donations to her church using the computer, that she could start to make flyers for her church using the computer and earn about $50 a month doing that. And so then Marilyn started taking classes. She became an energy ambassador and a digital ambassador for her community as well. So one of the tools, one of the things that Marilyn did as a digital ambassador, like some of our other residents, you might have heard of Ernesto. Resto, you might read about him online, is they're really the glue. The good news is there are some really well-defined models, big picture, in the tech industry that describe how fast people adopt technology. And I'm sure you've heard, of early, innovators, early adopters, the early majority, the late majority, and laggards. Well, some people would look at the U.S. and say people in public housing are in the laggards category. When we have 96% internet adoption in Austin, and with computers and devices, and you have 4% that haven't adopted the internet. They're really, from a big picture, in that laggard market segment. But in public housing, we have innovators, and we have early adopters, and we have early majority, and then the late majority. And what we find is that because people are the driver of technology adoption, people spread information, people build trust, they help others make context, or share context about what they're doing. And so we found that different types of residents are really good at working with different segments of our resident population, depending on where they are. So it's not true, technology adoption is cyclical. It's not true that if you just build it and put it up, everyone will come running. That we sometimes get requests from folks that say, I have this app. This app helps people manage their financial life. We're going to put it on a phone and distribute it to all of your seniors. And they're going to use this, and we're going to see these results. Well, people don't adopt technology kind of on a linear curve. And so that's a challenge for us sometimes. But having community partners that recognize that, we need, just as our residents are adopting technology, that we need to learn and unlearn and relearn how to do this, and that road can be bumpy, the learning, unlearning, and relearning, but we're staying focused on learning how to do this. That's a really important factor for success,
Wow.
I think.
That partnership and that patience and learning together is, so important and hard to come by. Yolanda Davila is here from BBVA Compass. They were one of the first banks. Well, they were already working in the space, trying to figure out solutions and moving full steam ahead. But when the new Q&As came out about broadband, and it was one of the first conversations I had with a financial institution, and they're partnering with an amazing school district, Farson Juan Alamo School District on the border. Danny King is the superintendent. They serve almost 83 colonias. I mean, the Tri-City School District. He and his staff turned around a very low-performing, dangerous school with gangs to this high-performing school where kids get dual enrollment with community college. Now they have a digital inclusion program. So BBVA Compass sponsored the strategic engineering study for the expansion of the broadband network. They're looking at other aspects of the program. They're also going to be starting a digital inclusion program with their EverFi financial technology curriculum that will help intergenerational, because Danny King believes in it. They have parent academies, so their schools are being used all the time, all day long. The parent academies are very vibrant. The parents are very involved in the school. The children, it's part of his philosophy of success to engage the parents. But that's another example, I think, of at least when you first jump into it, it's great to have partnerships like the one you all are describing and the one that Yolanda Davila has built on the border, because then you're going to show success and you're going to motivate so many other people, because the whole purpose of the demonstration project on the border at FAR, Texas, in Farson Juan Alamo School District, is to create a replicable model for the whole border region so that we create a robust fiber optic network for the region. I'm going to turn around to all of you all and see what kind of questions you have for our panelists or myself. And then, do you need a microphone?
No, just
okay.
thank
Yeah, I
you.
think we'll be okay.
Thanks, everyone. Really enjoyed this. I have a question, I think for Carissa, about, Joanna was just talking about sort of a replicable model. And I think it's so exciting when you do Catherine at a public housing authority. I guess part of my question is, how would you transfer an innovation like this to low-income, single-family homes where you wouldn't have a central authority to provide that? Because we know there's so many individuals who don't have the supports of being within a public housing system, but still have the same barriers we have.
That's right. I think you kind of are touching on exactly why this makes sense as such a critical pilot project, because we had an institutional partner that knew how to reach multiple residents, and there were community building and learning opportunities built into that aren't exactly the same, and the return on investment sort of is different when it's single family homes spread out. The economics of building infrastructure like this are very related to density, which is why you see the difference in rural availability and urban availability. That said, there are huge learnings that should be applied to single family. One, just like Catherine had some really compelling data about how much it turns out even lower income residents are spending of their monthly or annual incomes on internet. Some people do get the value proposition and are paying exorbitant amounts of their household income on it already. That's happening in single family homes too. So if that's happening anyway, how do you harness whether they're neighborhood associations or nearby community centers to become places to deliver learning and make this access to the internet more than just a forum for entertainment, but also for climbing that economic ladder, that ladder of economic opportunity. And so that's part of what, we have a program called Community Connections that was referenced earlier. It was actually hooking up Booker T. Washington's computer lab as one community connection that started this relationship. So we do try to find critical community centers, libraries. Many of the libraries in Southeast Austin right now are community connections of ours where we've built the sort of gigabit speeds there at no cost so that can then be a forum for digital literacy training. It's not perfect. I don't think we've solved the very sort of harder part of your question, which is how does it make financial sense to just give internet for free across just thousands of single family homes? I don't think anyone's figured that one out yet.
The example on the border, Yolanda Davila, you want to raise your hand so they know who you are in case they want to ask you questions afterwards. But on the border, the way that this project is conceived, it's called Digital Opportunity for the Rio Grande Valley, and the demonstration is FAR LifeNet, and the school district is key. So which school does this neighborhood feed into so they could do their digital inclusion training, so the families are getting connectivity in their home, and we have a core families, and they're going to this school, so through the parent academies and the curriculum, the parents and the students are going to be getting their digital inclusion training. So that's how we're managing it. A very strong superintendent and school district is a great way to do it, but it does require institutions that are willing to learn and work together, and certainly that is the whole philosophy of that school district, the Farson Juan Alamo School District. So it's going to be real important. I told Parissa that I'm writing like I'm running out of time at the Federal Reserve. I hope I'm not running out of time, but I am. There is a lot to say. So to capture what's happening on the border project is going to be so important, because other people can kind of learn what are the pitfalls, what are the best practices. We actually discovered the answer to closing the digital divide on the border, the role of local governments, the power to build and expand broadband networks, the power to attract ISPs, because you're meeting each other halfway. You know it's a public good that you want to achieve for many reasons: public safety, through education, to telehealth. That's another paper that we have coming out of the Dallas Fed this quarter. Because of how important it is for the healthcare industry, but it does help to have these institutions like a school district to work with, because then you can have really keep track of and we're keeping track and doing the assessment and evaluation that HACA does to be able to prove or to show impact is critical. So working with the school district, with the Region 1 Educational Service Center for us, is they have scholars and University of Texas, Rio Grande Valley. We're also identifying faculty. We're in the middle of it right now. Faculty who want to do this kind of work, like Sharon Strover does in Austin.
Yeah, I have a thought also. This is coming from this is a little bit of the corporate perspective coming in here, but as various industries digitized their services, they also began to learn the cost of providing services online versus in a face-to-face setting. So JCPenney knows if somebody comes in and buys socks, it's going to cost me, $12 to sell them socks. But if they buy those socks online, it's going to cost me $3 for them to buy those socks. Banks, brick and mortar, are required to be in areas where there are depositors who come into a branch. What does it cost a bank to serve somebody at a teller versus that person checking their balance online? Bank of America established, I think a year and a half ago, digital ambassadors who are people wearing red coats in the bank that teach people who are coming into the bank on the weekend how to check their balance or how to do different things online. There are insurance providers that know that people who have smartphones, people that can be texted, adhere to their plans. And so, I always wonder at what point does it make sense for United Healthcare to actually look at a set of single-family homes in a broad area and say it would be in our best interest to provide a $15 based on the Medicare and Medicaid data, which is available on open source platforms, to look at that area and say, what's the benefit to us of providing a Wi-Fi hotspot for these folks? So that, when does that reduce our cost of care, and also how does it improve adherence in different areas? Because they also run into trouble with folks that do have smartphones but have data caps. So you left the emergency room on the 15th, and we were texting until this date, but now it's the 29th, which is when you're due back in, and your service is out until the 10th of the next month. These types of, continuity of communication, and whether or not the internet is a utility that is a benefit to society as a whole, should help us kind of determine who should pay for basic broadband connectivity in other, areas.
We're trying to do our part the Federal Reserve basically said that the access to the internet is essential infrastructure to help change the whole underlying assumption, right? If you understand that, and we did from being with people, talking to them, how important it was, then you can start from a different place. And internet service providers in general, right, they have to increase profit and meet their shareholders. But the solution that we found on the border says, we can invest in our own broadband infrastructure and then make it cost effective for you to do the last mile, either through wireless or otherwise. And the city also has power to do some free Wi-Fi and so forth. And hopefully Google Fiber, I think in Huntsville, Alabama, you're not deploying fiber, but you're partnering in some way. I don't know if you want to talk about that.
Yeah, so that is sort of a model in which the relationship with the municipality is such that they're building it, we're running it, and actually making it available to consumers and running the rest of it.
That's pretty interesting, because Google Fiber cannot deploy probably in every city in the country or on the border, say, but maybe there are other partnerships, right? Like in our project, we're seeing all these small ISPs coming to the table and saying, we want to do the last mile to the colonias, because then they can afford to do it. SmartCom and Frontera Communications, but also, having Google Fiber see what's there and then saying, wow, we could do it. Because in Texas, you can't be a municipal provider of broadband, which is sometimes not even the best answer. It's not like Chattanooga, Tennessee or so. But investing in your infrastructure is a different thing for public safety, for everything that you have to do to incentivize and to become an owner rather than a renter. But I want to turn it over. I think you had a question.
Just a comment. I'm just really impressed with this whole panel and the conversation that's going on. My bias, I'm sort of like a chief technical guy. I was chief technical officer of a national telecommunications company. We did a lot of, and also we solved the problems of shipping vessels around the world as well, mobile satellite and wireless. I would just add this to the conversation. One, that it's very difficult for Google. It's wonderful to have Google Fiber in Los Angeles. That's amazing. It's amazing. Technologically, can't have that benefit, right? I think sometimes we sort of artificially define the thing as 25 megabits is necessary. I'm going to argue that if we had 10 megabits, even to our homes, it would actually be okay. I mean, a lot of us, at least as a tactical strategy. So I'll just throw in the conversation that a little bit of innovation is hybrid satellite terrestrial services. We do it, we've done it for years, and what's really kind of funny is that there's more and more bandwidth floating by. The whole state of Texas is covered with terrific satellite. And so you look at this kind of, if you think outside the box, we could actually come up with a model that would actually make some sense. We've done this in a few scenarios to cover this rural broadband sort of initiative, but I don't hear many people talking about that. But I think this intersection of technology thinking, innovation, with public policy, and pretty good capital funding and sort of stuff is really interesting. I'd be interested to think about that and think, I'm not sure who's responsible for that, but as it relates to these individual subscribers that are way out in the middle of not multi-tenant.
Yeah, and I didn't say what the colonias are, but they're either peri-urban or deep rural areas, housing settlements, usually that lack basic infrastructure and maybe safe and decent housing. So those areas, we're looking for, trust me, all kinds of creative solutions. We're trying to be strategic, we meaning the collective group, not the Federal Reserve, on the border, is trying to be strategic in its deployment of fiber optic infrastructure so that all the kinds of solutions will work, right? Because they'll be close enough to fiber optic infrastructure. In the case of satellite, we just want to learn everything we can, because the truth is we're going to have to look at all those possibilities. And that's why having people here in this room, for example, from so many diverse backgrounds is so important, because otherwise we wouldn't get together. So in my world now, I have utility lawyers and engineers. I've been in public policy. I mean, I deal in housing, and I had to learn from the bottom up, from experts in the field. And it wasn't a comfortable place to be, but it was a necessary place to be. I had to be open to learning new things. I mean, I look at polls now and I can tell you what's on the polls, and it's just awful. And I tell my family and they're just like, oh God, you're boring. But it's so important to understand basically what I want to do, what we want to do at the Federal Reserve is make the invisible visible. How do we help people know how technology is working and the choices they have? All the young people coming from the border, for example, and here in East Austin and so forth, they're going to be the lawyers that are going to be making the laws, because we're so behind with technology, right? They're going to be making the laws, making the policy that as technology grows, we have to become more human. We must, because we have to challenge cognitive computing and artificial intelligence and all of that to make sure that we are making decisions that are humane, that bring people in, and that help us to not create even wider income and wealth gaps than we're seeing now. We have to fix this. And one way to intervene, and I guess I'll sort of wrap up. I don't know if anybody has any other comments, but I'll just kind of wrap up the why part of this, right? Why are we here? We're seeing some of the greatest wealth and income inequality since the Great Depression. The top 3% account for 30.5% of all income and a whole 54.4% of all net worth. That's according to the Federal Reserve. And the digital divide is a structural barrier to upward mobility for people. And in fact, if you don't have digital access, we're seeing that you might be experiencing downward mobility. So it's not the way we want to go, but we can research, we can bring the best answers. Catherine showed Secretary Castro in one of the pictures when he had come to Austin to visit what they were doing and brought it to HUD and developed Connect Home. He was it matters, our networks, our human networks. He had been my mayor, so he invited me into this knowledge base of people in broadband across the country so that I could learn from the very best, the best practices to bring to the border community, to the lowest income area of the country. The counties I was working in always are vying for the poorest county in the country, a persistent poverty area of the country. We know the answer. We know what it takes in partnerships, the kinds of partnerships we've talked about today. Financial institutions stepping up in this very powerful way that finance can create good in the community. And so we have the answers. It's going to be all a matter of will. And that's why we're trying to, at the Federal Reserve, write everything down, make it available to people so that they can know that this can be solved. The advent of the commercial internet was back in 1995. Why are we still here? What has been the underlying assumption that has brought us to this place? It's that digital access is a luxury. We are saying it's an essential necessity. Thank you so much for joining us. We have the publication Closing the Digital Divide of the Federal Reserve available for you. It's a how-to guide for communities. We're asking all cities and towns to make their digital inclusion plan as part of their economic development plan. Dina, who couldn't be here from HUD, we're going to send this to you by email because we couldn't make enough copies, but it's, so the Digital Divide publication from the Fed has a lot of resources in there for you, a lot of the best practices. She presents HUD resources for digital inclusion as well. CDBG funds can go towards broadband infrastructure and digital inclusion, and all kinds of other programs that HUD is leading to bring digital inclusion to low-income communities. So we're going to email this to you because we have the people who signed up for this section. Thank you so much. Thank you to our panelists. So great to be with you all.